Welcome to the Queer Spirit Podcast. We're your hosts, Nick Fenagoni
and Tanya Marco Viado. Our Queer Spirit Podcast spotlights queer artists, healers, practitioners, activists, and beings
who share their work and magic with our LGBTQIA, two-spirit, trans, and gender nonconforming communities and the collective. Our host today is Amanda Yates Garcia, she, her. Amanda is a writer, witch, and the Oracle of Los Angeles. Her work has been featured in news and media outlets around the world. She has led rituals, classes, and workshops on magic and witchcraft at schools and museums throughout California and many other venues. Amanda hosts monthly moon rituals online and the popular Between the Worlds podcast, which looks at the Western mystery traditions through a mythopoetic lens. Her book, Initiated, Memoir of a Witch, received a starred review from Kirkus and Publishers Weekly and has been translated into 6 languages.
Today, we begin by casting a magic queer circle to explore the medicine of enough. Queer enough, bi enough, witchy enough. Enough is enough already. Dipping into each of our stories, we connect the dots of being queer, being a witch, and what is enough anyway. We're called to conjure a queer wellness spell that is sprinkled with gratitude for our queer ancestors, transcestors, and descendants. What a queerly delightful gift it is to share space with Amanda.
To learn more, find Amanda at oracleoflosangeles.com. To find out more about her work, become a member of her mystery cult at amandayatesgarcia.substack.com.
Welcome, everyone. We're so grateful to be here together. Queer Spirit, Nick and I are sharing some time with Amanda Yates Garcia, and we love to begin all of our shared time with some grounding. So we want to invite all of us here to take a moment to ground. So if it feels good, closing your eyes, softening your gaze, maybe a little shimmy, shake, stretch, bend in the body, connecting to the breath and inhaling and exhaling as it feels good to you and your system, honoring the Tongva, Kich, Chumash lands and the stewards of those lands, and our Lone people and the stewards of those lands, our elements, earth, air, fire, water, ether, and spirit, our tools, guides, and practices. As we share some time and ground in today, we want to name and honor all forms of harm, genocide, oppression, climate change, climate crisis, and send all forms of support and care to whomever and wherever it may be needed and called for. And I just would like to ask Nick and Amanda if they would like to sprinkle anything into our grounding today.
Gratitude for life, for our bodies, and for the interconnectedness. All beings, may we rise to care for each other.
And in the name of interconnectedness, I always like to bring in the magical energy of the mycelium network around the world, connecting us all together, plants and animals alike.
Ashe, aho. Thank you both.
And so now I'll start calling in the circle.
Yeah, so in the spirit of having our guest here today and her practice and her work, I'm going to invite Amanda to cast a sacred circle for us today.
Okay, so wherever we are, whether we're sitting or if we want to stand, or if you're driving or doing something, you can do this safely and just do it in your spirit. Let's first turn in spirit to orient towards the east, orient towards the dawn, towards new awakenings, towards the rising sun, towards light flooding into our awareness, crossing over the mountains, touching the tops of the trees as the birds sing and awaken and call out to each other across the branches that they have survived the night, that they're ready to connect with one another. And orient towards all of the winged ones, pollinators, the bats, bits of pollen that fly through the air, and all the birds themselves, the ones that ride the wind and feel our gratitude for them, and feel that air that courses beneath their wings and how it moves through us, how it moves through our lungs and our bloodstream, and how our body transforms that air, sucks in the oxygen, releases the carbon dioxide, and how we breathe then with the trees and with the other plants, and how we are part of this circle of life. And then turn in spirit and face the south, direction of heat, fire, revolution, resistance, liberation, spirit of community, communitas, and rising together in the heat of the sun that illuminates the equator and gives life to plants. That food, the heat and the light of the sun as food, as nourishment that comes in and moves through the body of the plants, and that which we take in to our own bodies through the leaves of plants, that gives us energy, that gives us fire, that gives us the ability to take action, and that we can feel that heat and the light of the sun in our own bodies and the warmth of our bodies. We might just place our hands on our heart or even hold our own hands and feel that heat as it moves through us, and know that that heat is the same heat that is at the core of our earth, that creates space for light, that creates space for life, that keeps us warm and keeps us in a place that's habitable. And that heat in our bodies and in the bodies of our lovers and friends is also the light of the sun and the stars and all the stars throughout the universe. And then we can continue our turn and orient towards the west. Here on the West Coast, the west is the land of water, of relationship, of that life-giving force that moves through the rivers, the rain, that moves through the skies in the form of clouds, and all the beings that live in the water. We have an opportunity now to honor them. The whales, plankton, the jellyfish, the dolphins, the sea urchins and anemones and otters, and all the fish, all things that swim, and the power of the waves and the powers of the water as they move across the earth, and how they connect us to the moon and the pulling of the tides and the rising of our blood, and how all the waters in the world are constantly moving, and how we also take those into our bodies. And we take nourishment from them and share our life force with them, and how all the water in our own bodies has moved through so many countless lives before us, and maybe was even on other stars or asteroids before it came here to Earth. And then turn and orient towards the north, towards the spirits of our ancestors, towards the calcium, the granite, and the trees and the mountains, and all the material things that make up our bodies, that nourish us, all the wisdom of the ancestors that is rooted beneath our feet, that guides us, that DNA, that knowledge, that evolution of life as it's changed with the land, with the environment. Feel it grounding us, holding us, caring for us. And as we face north, making that commitment to be a good ancestor and care for future generations. We honor and celebrate and adore the spirits of the north, the south, the east, the west, the above, the below, the within, the without, and all the beings that come together across the universe and across space and time to create this reality as we know it. And all the realities. May we move through the porthole between the worlds. And as we enter the space between the worlds, know that what we do here affects all worlds, here beyond the bounds of time. In the name of love, so mote it be.
So mote it be.
So mote it be.
Thank you for starting us off with that beautiful prayer and blessing for our space together today.
Thank you for being with me as we move between the worlds. It's an honor to be here.
So it's funny that you mentioned that term between the worlds, because that was a sort of overarching concept that Tanya Mark and I had about our time together today, and exploring what it means to be between the worlds, both as witches and as queer people. So that's part of what we're hoping to explore today. So we thought we'd have you start out, Amanda, by having you share with us perhaps a story about being between the worlds, how being a queer witch has taught you to be and move between the worlds, and how those identities have influenced you.
Yeah. Well, I think much like my witchcraft, my queerness, I mean, I think one of the things about queerness is that we're all kind of on our own journeys together. And that's one of the beauties, I think, both of queerness and witchcraft to me, is that in those adventures, we're leaving, as Sarah Ahmed, the phenomenologist, philosopher, speaks to, we're like leaving the straight line. We're leaving the formation that was created for us, that we were born into in the overculture and the dominant culture, and forging our own path. And on that path, we find others who are also doing the same thing. For me, I think my queerness was never really in question. And I know that for some people, there are moments of kind of dawning awareness of their queerness or awakenings to that. I feel like for me, both in relation to queerness and witchcraft, I feel like I always was looking at the dominant culture and thinking, what do you mean you're not that way? Or like that you don't understand this? Like, it just seems so natural to me, to like my attraction to my friends when I was a child, or, like the glamour magic of women when I was a young girl. It seemed as obviously attractive as any other gender expression. So I was just like, I don't get it, why everyone doesn't see the world this way, because I felt very comfortable in that. And I never, one of the critiques that it wasn't a critique, but an observation about one of my book, Initiated Memoir of a Witch, was another queer bi writer who interviewed me about it. And she said that one of the things that she loved about it was that I never really remarked on my queerness. It just was a queer book. And I didn't feel like I had to say that I was queer or make a statement about it, because I assumed that my readership was queer. And I just assumed a queer readership. I assumed that, kind of the people who were coming to it were also receiving it the same way. Although, since I've written it, I also have thought a lot about it, and I've grown a lot in terms of, who I am. I think we all continue to grow. And also, over the past 10 years or so, my public face has grown a lot. And while as a private person, I didn't feel it necessary to announce my queerness at all, I feel more as a public person, more like a responsibility to do so for people who don't feel like they can, or who maybe haven't had the same openness in their lives. With my mother, I feel like anti-queerness can arise in many different ways, even in people who don't realize it. Even within ourselves, we can find pockets of it. So, for the most part, my mother was accepting. My father is completely not accepting. And, we don't talk about it anyway. That's a whole other issue. But I never felt like I needed to speak to that. And it was also something that I was kind of confused about when I really came into queer culture. When I was 18, I moved from Santa Barbara, where I was living, growing up, to San Francisco in the mid-90s, where, it was such a powerful queer space. And I felt a little confused about queer identity, I think, at the time, because I kind of was like, well, why does announcing our queerness have to be the center of our identity like this? Like, can't we be really interested in like literature or art, or like, why does everything have to be like queer art or queer literature? Like, I felt often like I was, at that time, was wearing, jeans and belts, the 90s, like studded belt, like, white tank tops. And I had a shaved head, I had a pierced nose. And I was living with a bunch of other queer women who would have identified as lesbians probably at the time. And they were always like, but you're so femme. But they meant it kind of as a criticism, And I was like confused because I was like, what do I have to do? Because I knew it wasn't good to be femme. Like, it didn't seem like it was okay to be femme. If it seemed like it was a cop out to them or something. And I was like, if I'm shaving my head and piercing my nose and wearing baggy pants, like, what more do I have to do to not be femme? But they're like, you're just inherently femme. And now, now I have a lot more peace and, like chillness with who I am. And I also understand a lot more about like how difficult, how treacherous the world is for, LGBTQIA plus people, and how, that it can really make us adopt those same violences and things towards one another. And so now I have a lot more affection and like kind of dearness in relation to that like whole world of the time, And so that was kind of the queer story that wanted to come out today, I guess. And then in relation to witchcraft, I was born, my mother's a witch in the tradition of reclaiming. And so that was a very natural part of my life as well. And it still seems to me, still like, 48 years later, it baffles me that, if I say that I'm a witch, then people are like, oh my God, what? Like, that's so weird. And I'm like, is it though? It's not really. Like, it seems very normal to me. And I just assume that everybody is going to be interested and, cool with it, or even witches themselves. But that's not true, it turns out. So, well, I'm so curious. I'm so curious to hear your stories too. Like in my story, is there anything that reminds you?
Common denominators, like connecting the dots. Yeah. Well, I just thank you, because I feel like the things that you've named, right? And it's interesting, right? Because you can parallel it, witchcraft and queerness, like you just paralleled the same feeling, like this is just who I am. And so there was no like this idea of like, well, is there anything wrong with it? Like, I definitely identify to that. Like, I really feel that I just knew from the get-go that I was a queer being. So to me, it was like, yeah, isn't this like, we just like people and we get crushes on people. And, so it's very interesting to name that, as well as like putting little punch card holes in your queer card, like in your early 20s of where do you fall along the queer spectrum. I also identify with that, and having, some disruption or just kind of explaining, feeling like having to explain to my friends, around if I dressed a certain way, then I had to act a certain way. And I thought, like this coming out as queer person seems much more complicated. Like, I felt like coming out of the closet felt much more like, like what's happening. So I appreciate you naming that, and also naming that as it applies to being a witch and witchcraft as well, because they are very kind of like, they both kind of like walk side by side in that way. So yeah, that's what I identify with, is this having different experiences around it, but also just in queerness and witchcraft, like navigating who we are. Because to me, it just seemed like this is just me, like, and so it was more the reactions from folks, like the anti or the fear reactions, that I think were the things I navigated along the path, right? Were along that. So I super appreciate you naming that and attaching it to both. So right on for dropping that medicine.
As you say that, it really inspires me to think about how also in witchcraft, when people come to witchcraft, that they often are like, oh, finally, I have this home, right? Because I never felt completely right where I was, with the people that I was growing up around or in the culture that I was brought up in, and which makes me want to speak to both queer communities and witch communities and be like, let's offer some space for people when they come and find us. Not everybody has to believe the same way. Not everybody has to think the same things. I think a lot of witches initially, when they come into the witch community, are really ecstatic, but then also within the witch community, there can be all these like infights and divides and kind of, intrigues and dramas, as happen when any group of people come together. It's not just witches. It's not just queer folk. We can see it everywhere in the world, right? We know this, but it does mean for me now, as I'm becoming a witch elder and a queer elder, that I want to create spaces where people can feel a little safer to have discussions and disagreements without feeling like we're all going to be cast into the sea or burnt at the stake. So,
one thing I've been thinking about as you've been talking is this concept of dualism versus non-dualism, which is a dualism in and of itself. But, when you were talking about like being in San Francisco and being femme, and I don't know if you use this language, but the phrase that popped in my head is like, you're not queer enough, right? That you're...
Yeah, totally. Which is like a bisexual thing a lot anyway. But yeah.
So, I think that there's all sorts of ways that queer people along the spectrum feel that way, depending on how they identify and how they want to identify and who they're socializing with and that kind of thing. And I also wonder, like as you're talking about when people first come into pagan community or witch community, like if there's a way of feeling like not witch enough or not pagan enough, like, oh, I have to have earrings that have a pentacle on them, and I have to have black candles, and I have to have a broomstick in my kitchen or something like that, as opposed to just like being queer the way that you want to be queer, or being a witch the way that you want to be a witch, like that feels right for you, and having that be okay.
Totally. Thank you so much for naming that. Yeah, I think a lot of the time, and maybe when we're in those youthful queer circles where we're really feeling like the need to kind of proclaim that queerness, or, wear the things, or the same with like witchcraft. Not that there's anything wrong with like wearing your witchcraft on your sleeve, it's great. But I feel for myself that the more confident I get in my own queerness and the more confident I get in my own witchcraft, which really has to do with a confidence in myself and a feeling like I don't need anybody's permission. I don't need anybody's like seal of approval, which is very much like an age thing for me. Then I feel less of a need to like assert to like put out a shingle that says this is who I am, I wonder if that's been like, when did you know that you were queer enough? Because I know that even though, for instance, like as someone who's bisexual, like this is something that's like a discourse in the bisexual community a lot, right? Which is like that you feel really queer when you're dating someone who is also sort of like perceived as queer by other people, right? Like if you date another feminine identifying person, but then you feel like that card gets revoked from your own community if you date someone who's more masculine identifying. But so, or depending, I mean, obviously, whatever, we could get into all the granular bits of that. But so it's interesting that even within the queer community, we're kind of competing for what is queer enough, which is often based on like what the dominant order who does not like us is determining for us, right? I wonder how you perceive that and how that has come up for you in your life, if you feel comfortable to share.
Are you asking both of us or one of us in particular?
I'm interested for both of you.
No, that's fine. I wasn't sure,
My response to that is that I think as I think as a person who knew, listen, I knew I was non-binary, a witch, and queer from very young age. And I just knew it. And I may not have had the languaging to, as I learned what those things were. So I think that I spent a lot of time in my youth as not queer enough, not, this enough, because again, it was a lot about the environment that I was in and the community that I was in. I think as I found like-minded community, right, that was not judgmental, because I also have this idea that it was really struggle for me to come out in my early 20s and get so much questioning from my own queer community. Well, are you butch? Are you dyke? Are you this? Are you that? And I'm just like, oh my God, like, I'm just fucking queer. Like, I thought my idea was like, okay, like I made it here. And so, but now you want me to answer all of these questions, and then you like, oh, I'm not supposed to talk. I had such an issue with, I'm not supposed to hang out with gay men at the time, labeled as gay men. And it just felt so confusing to me. So I felt like I went through my own kind of like process of that. And I don't think it was probably until, to be honest, until like my, I don't know, maybe like late 30s, to be honest, where I was like, fuck this. I am queer enough. I am Tanya Mark enough. That's it, like, and I think that's just something of like living experiences, and that you can get to a place. I think, Amanda, you touched on that, where you just feel from the inside out as enough. So it like, who gives a fuck what all of this is? And so, yeah, that's how kind of, now I'm just like, really, because 54, man, when you hit 50s, I mean, y'all aren't there yet, but when you do, it's so fucking empowering, because you're just like, who really gives a fuck? Like, no, like, this is it, this is the package, and I don't really care if you take it or leave it. So, yeah, I think it's a lot of that is the evolution of living and growing up and experiences, and, yeah.
And being able to call into your life like people who are able to accept you for who you are and appreciate that, and who have a sense of humor and, are curious about the world as well. I think we become a lot more skillful as we get older in creating our communities, and potentially the people in our communities also, as they're doing their own aging process, are sort of shedding those needs to classify and, become a little less brittle and a little less fearful, hopefully, around like infiltration or.
And I'll name it, the universe. I think that actually I'll parallel that also kind of with my witchcraft. And to be honest, when I found your online communities of Between the Worlds and Mystery Cult, holy moly, that was just like this other, like, I feel so happy. I mean, Nick can attest to it. I'm like, oh, I have full moon coven tonight, and it's like 100+ witches. And I just share openly, even with my family, my mom, like, I have coven tonight, and it's 100+ witches that show up. Like, I think finding you and the community also, anytime, as to what you're speaking to, when we can find community and find like, hey, we're not alone in this, that also is very amplifying, and so.
Well, your presence there is always really wonderful. And I've learned so much from you, from being in community with you, and your open-heartedness and your skillfulness in inviting people in, and your questions and everything. So thank you so much for being there. Yeah, I'm really curious about you, Nick, as well, about your queer enough story, like how you or witch enough story too.
I think that, that's not something I feel like I've ever been concerned about, of being queer enough or gay enough, being more cis gay male identified person, and being at least coming out in kind of those circles in the, mid late 90s. And also here in San Francisco, I was very lucky to have that happen. But I think as I came more into my labeling of myself as a witch, and even understanding that that's kind of part of my identity a little bit later, after I came out as gay. And I think that's been the one that I have had. It's been a challenge to like intersect those both, I think, like to be a witch in queer community, especially when I was younger, and people were like, well, what does that mean? And people were more into just like, dating and partying and stuff like that. And, I've always been very connected to nature. At my core, I'm an animist. Like, that's kind of like the foundation of everything for me, and my connection to nature and the elements. And yeah, it's just been, so I've always wanted to find like the other people who are like me, who are both, both queer and witchy. And so those were the people that it took me a while to find them. But then once I did, I've, ended up being on the skirts of like, some of these communities like Reclaiming or Radical Fairies and stuff like that. And that's where I really started to find my people, and the people that I was like, oh, this is where they are. I was like, well, I've come out, but I'm like, well, I didn't really find like my people there. Not that they didn't think I wasn't queer enough, but they weren't really like, I guess for me, they weren't witchy enough for me. in terms of the kinds of people that I wanted to have in my life and connect with. So, and then once I got really clear about that and really intentional, here I am, a witch. I'm just like, I'm going to get clear on my intention and my motivation, and I'm just going to put energy into that. Then the gates pretty quickly kind of flooded open, and I found my community and my connection. And that's also how I met my husband. And we met at a Samhain ritual. Yeah.
That is so great.
Yeah.
How auspicious. What I know, though, that, well, someone very close to me in my life who's a gay man, and I talk a lot about his navigation in the gay male community around, especially around like sexuality, and like feeling that, I mean, I don't want to put any words in anybody's mouth, but it's something that I notice a lot in my clients as well, who, for instance, are poly. I'm not poly, but I'm, as a Scorpio, 5 planets in Scorpio, it's just like poly's too much for me. But I know a lot of poly people who are in that community are like, I don't feel poly enough. Like that's something that's like that their partners or whatever might criticize them and be like, you're not being open enough to whatever experience. And I know particularly, and a lot of for the gay men that I know, that like, at least the one that I'm thinking of, like really kind of, well, he says he wants to be a hobbit. Like he's like all about like cozy, wants to have 11sies and, be in nature and everything, and finds it kind of alienating sometimes to feel like party culture or like being out or being like very like wanting to explore his sexuality and then also not wanting to like be a hobbit, which I know is like something that we all have in our own kind of ecosystems, like the things that we're supposed to do or that are like the normative behaviors that might not be normative in like the dominant culture, but that within the communities that we're in, that we can feel really like, am I supposed to do that? Am I not supposed to do that? How am I supposed to do
I mean, part of what I think you're speaking to is what I would call like kind of this hypersexuality of gay male culture, and maybe even a little bit in poly culture. And I think people see other people being like very sexually active or just dating a lot of people, and they think this is what I have to do in order to be like a gay man, or this is what it means to be in the poly community. But a lot of those people, like, they're just trying to fit in. Again, coming back to like being, queer enough or witch enough or poly enough or whatever it is. I think they're just trying to belong and fit in. And they feel like, well, if I don't do like what all these other people are doing, then it can't belong, or I'm not enough, or I'm not doing it right, that kind of thing. But I feel really lucky in terms of the work that I do. And I think both of you work with clients in different ways, that you actually get to hear what people actually think about these things. And so I know that like this hypersexuality of a lot of queer cultural, especially gay male culture, is not what it actually looks like on the surface. For people who are involved in that and people who are not involved in that, in terms of like what people want, it's just and so it's also, I think, coming back to what you were saying, Amanda, and Tanya Mark, you were saying like how as we age, we just get more comfortable in being who we are, and that we don't have to be the way we think other people want us to be, whatever that part of identity we have that they don't understand or don't grok with.
I appreciate this medicine that's flowing, and I'm really called to, because we are between the worlds. Like, I just want to send out some gratitude to our queer ancestors, our bi ancestors, our witch ancestors, like the folks that have come before us that navigated much more difficulty, right? I mean, when watching this younger generation of queer folks and witch folks, and there's this, like, I feel very called to say, like, this is what has paved the way for us to have conversations. Our ancestors that went through so much, in many ways still do go through, we still, as those communities, do struggle. But I just want to name that as a medicine and just say thank you to them, because wow, we've gotten to a place where we can have a fucking conversation that who cares about what's enough, just the liberation of being who you are, you know what I mean? And being who you are from a place of that doesn't even have to be checking boxes. Be who you need to be, love who you need to love. As a person who, I always felt a lot of guilt and shame around feeling deep connections with multiple people. And it didn't necessarily equal sex. It just meant intimate connections of people that I deeply love. And now I'm like, yeah, but I don't consider, I really even say that, I've had folks say, well, that's this, it's this. And I'm like, it's just me and the way in which I connect with people and the way in which I love. So I prefer not to have those kinds of labels. I think even more so put upon me, because I feel that it kind of, sometimes it just feels like then it goes back into that cycle of what is enough. And I think we're also just want to name, like, it's this collective oppression energy that we're in. This is why, we are in this, like, where did we get these queer cards and witch cards and enough? It's because of the systems we live in, right? And it's because of the anti to those things, the reactions to those things, that we are now invited to have conversations around this in hopes to freaking change it and say, woof, let's just let go of those things and make spaces and containers, right, in which we can just feel comfortable to be us and to be loved and accepted as who we are.
What you're speaking to helps me really connect the tissues of our conversation together, because it makes me think about how witchcraft is a practice, or offers us rituals for helping us find our way to being enough and towards holding yes and holding ambiguity. We need rituals to do that, or rituals are one powerful way of doing that. It's not the only way, but it's a way, if you're looking for one, that help us practice and inhabit and experience what it is to be in a state of deep connectedness and also indeterminacy, which we don't really get very often in our culture, because our culture is constantly wanting us to say what we are, like check it on a box, like, are we male or female? Like, do we have this? Do we have that? Like, we're supposed to always be qualifying ourselves and earning our right to be here. So much so that it's very difficult for us to imagine or experience in our bodies what it feels like to be present to whatever we are in the constant change and flux. And also the fact that we have so few boundaries, as you were speaking to animism before, Nick. One of the things that I really love about animism is that we're not separate, right? Like, from the living organism of the earth itself, that we, even as humans, are not this like impermeable container holding our consciousness, like in a Cartesian view of like mind in like a little box shape, like a body shaped like a box, or a box shaped body, or whatever, like a body box. We're not a mind in a body box. Like, our mind is also in the mycelium and in the wind and in the birds and in the water. Like, we are not what we think we are. And the thing is, we think that we are that, even though it's an illusion, because we've been conditioned to believe that over and over. So magic offers us rituals to help us see beyond that, which is what I think enchantment is. So when we're like wanting to live an enchanted life, or wanting to experience the enchanted world is the world of deep interconnectedness, where not only are we materially interconnected, right? So the water that's in our blood is in also the ocean and the sky and the bloodstream of birds. We are also imaginally interconnected, that our myths, our archetypes, our unconscious, our stories, our songs, our music, all of these are also interwoven, and are interwoven and interpenetrating with the water, right? There's no separation between myth and material as well, which is the next level of kind of mind expanded awareness, which we really do have to practice, because it's such a difficult concept to wrap our head around. But it's also something that many Indigenous communities speak to. The idea that a myth is a living thing, is a story, is something that you can invoke. That's why there's, certain stories that you shouldn't say at certain times, because you're really literally calling beings into the room by speaking out the story, because the story is alive. And so there's taboos around when we can say it, and that changes the way that our reality operates, because it makes us think, oh, what stories are we speaking into being all the time? What realities are we inscribing? Who are we calling in? Who are we invoking? We're often invoking beings that we maybe want to see less.
Yeah, I think that this interconnectedness is sort of the key of this conversation about being between the worlds. And I think that's part of the power of being both queer and witches, is that both, if we choose to, we can use those identities and those life experiences to allow us to move between the worlds, from heterosexual to queer, or from muggle to witch, that kind of thing. And that there's a spectrum. And I think that's part of what queerness, especially as queerness is blossoming and opening up, because queerness in and of itself had a lot of binary, and now there's a lot of binary. And I think that's the beauty of the trans and non-binary community, that is really challenging the world to see like what's in the in-between. Like between black and white, there's so many shades of gray, right? And I think that's the world that we all need to be walking between, is that gray path, the in-between, and that it's challenging for a lot of people who grew up with these binary concepts of, what do you mean, like, you're not a he or a she, that you're a they? Like, I don't understand. And like, well, breathe, space into it. Open your mind, open your heart, open your body, and try something a little bit different. It feels slippery, it feels scary, it feels mysterious.
Yeah. And so much gratitude, building on what Tanya Mark was saying about a gratitude towards our trans and non-binary and gender non-conforming ancestors, because they've really opened this door for all of us to be able to enter into a place of greater expansiveness. Even if we do see ourselves as cis or whatever, like that there are so many more possibilities available to us in terms of like how we can live our life, who we get to be, because all of our trans non-conforming ancestors have like opened that at great cost to themselves, and bloodshed, even like at great sacrifice. And yeah, I feel so much gratitude, just even for myself personally, in terms of the journey that my trans kin have taken me on, in terms of like what I think reality is, what I think humanity is, has been so expanded by people who have done that labor of unweaving the order that is so confining. And so orders our reality in the way that we see the world, that it's like, what do you mean there can be more? What do you mean you can stop being man like that, or a woman, or, that we've relied on that, and culturally specifically in like the Anglo-West for so long, that and it's so foundational to the way that we perceive reality and what has to happen politically, economically, within our families. That saying that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. But capitalism and the gender binary and patriarchy are all interwoven like inextricably together. So trans people are unweaving capitalism through their very existence. I mean, like, I'm deeply grateful to them.
Oh, shit. And I was thinking, like, just like being queer and a witch is badass. Like, we should just put that medicine out there. It's badass. And replace enough with, it's badass. So being you, being who you are, being, honoring that, being who you are, loving who you love, loving yourself as you need to, all of that. It's badassery. It's liberation, And I think, thank you for connecting the dot around trans and queerness being such a response to, it is a very potent response to oppression and capitalism. And because it is asking folks, it is an invite to be who you need to be, you know what I mean? And walk that with integrity and grace. And also, so juiciness today, juiciness going on.
So we just pressed pause and had a little conversation, dear listeners out there, about how to close out this time that we've had together today. And some of the things that we came up with were wanting to send blessings and love back to ourselves. Specifically, Tanya Mark was saying that they wanted to send a blessing to my queer self when I was in my, tank tops and baggy pants and studded belts and shaved head and like trying to figure out and navigating my way through, early young adulthood and queerness and witchcraftness. And I echoed that and wanted to send that same blessing and love back to not only to Nick, but to all of you. And we all really wanted to do that. So we're going to end in a spell that's going to begin by us as slightly elder, which is going back and just saying what we would like to give to our younger self. And we invite you to join us as we do this, to consider what you would like to offer to that young you who is just kind of figuring out the ropes. And maybe it was the young you last week, but whoever it was, and maybe there's even someone who calls more to you than even your younger self. Maybe there's someone whose younger self you want to send a blessing to. So we're going to just say that together, and then we're going to do a short chant together. And it's a call and response. So you'll be able to join in and let this work that we're doing together weave across space and time to create blessings and healing for all beings, especially queer witchy beings. So I want to start by sending young Amanda, young femme Amanda, a sense of, I really want her to know that everything ends up all right, that she figures it out, that she is allowed to be safe and she is allowed to have fun and to just enjoy her life. She doesn't have to worry so much about whether or not she will make it, whether or not she is lovable, whether or not she will ever be saved, that she gets to determine what feels good for her and she gets to determine what feels safe for her. And that if she pays attention to that, she's going to find so much joy in her life. So I send that out to you, young Amanda. I love you. I'm grateful to you for all the work you put in to bringing us here to this time. We are alive now. What about you two?
Well, to the young Tanya Mark, I want to also say thank you. Thank you for paving the way for us to get here. And I just want to assure them that they are divinely, perfectly queer and badass in so many ways, and to just shine, 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 and keep getting shinier and shinier. And just a big thank you. Yeah.
And to the young queer Nick, I want to say thank you and keep exploring, be courageous, turn over every stone, open every door, and know that your people are coming very soon.
Yay. So let's start the chant to send that blessing back through space and time and out for our future queer witch descendants, and also to heal our brothers and sisters and cousins and all our kin across the world. Now, I am blessed. I am a blessing.
I am blessed. I am
a
blessing.
blessing.
I am blessed.
I am a blessing.
I am blessed. I am a blessing.
You are blessed. You are a blessing.
You are
You
blessed.
are blessed.
You are a blessing.
You are a
You
blessing.
are a blessing.
You are blessed.
You are blessed.
You are
You are a
blessed.
blessing.
You are a blessing.
You are
You are
blessed.
blessed.
You are a
You
blessing.
are a blessing.
We are blessed. We are a blessing.
We are blessed.
Are blessed.
We are a blessing.
We are a blessing.
We are
We are
blessing.
blessed.
We are blessed.
We are a
We are
blessing.
a blessing.
We are
We
blessing.
are
We are
blessed.
blessed.
We are
We
blessed.
are a blessing.
We are a blessing.
Blessed be.
Blessed be.
Amanda, would you like to begin to open the circle to end our conversation?
Yes. I would like to offer thanks and gratitude so much to both of you and your spirits and your young selves and all the work that went into making you who you are so that you're able to have these conversations and host them now, for all the good that they create and the medicine that they create in the world. I would like to thank all of our listeners out there whose younger selves have brought them to the space where they're curious about queer spirituality and have taken the time out of their day to listen to this and participate in this and to wonder about all the things that we brought into the circle today. Thank you so much for your existence and for your curiosity and for your presence. Thank you to the spirits of water and earth and air and fire, to the spirits of witchcraft and to our queer ancestors who have gathered here with us today to create this cauldron where we can brew the medicine that we're going to take from this experience out into the world. So much gratitude is here. So much gratitude flows through. May we take this medicine out. May it be received for the good of all in the name of love. Hail and farewell.
Hail and farewell. Thank you, Amanda. So, Amanda, can you share with our listeners where they can find you and connect with you and your work?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned before, I have a book that I think is very much a coming of age in witchcraft and queerness called Initiated Memoir of a Witch. And if you think that you might be a witch, then probably if you read that book, you will realize that you are. And I also have a podcast called Between the Worlds podcast, available all places podcasts are distributed. And we have been a bit slow in getting those out recently, but we have like 100 episodes or something. So you'll have plenty to catch up on. And that really focuses on the tarot and looking at the Western mystery traditions through a mythopoetic lens. I also have a community called Mystery Cult on Substack. And there we have monthly full moon rituals. We have live chats where we unpack a lot of the material that we go over in the moon circles. We have a reading group, and we also get monthly witch guides that give you kind of guidance, rituals, thoughts, things to practice, kind of offers a practicum for you to do that work. And the first level is free. So if you just want to come in and hang out and see what's going on, go to amandayatesgarcia.substack.com or Google search Mystery Cult on Substack with Amanda Yates Garcia, and you'll find that there. And you might also find me on Instagram. I am currently getting a PhD, so I have my full-time business, and I'm also getting a doctorate. So I have not been on socials as much as I used to be, where I was like a real breakneck speed social media maven. But now I just post every, week or 4 just to say Free Palestine. But beyond that, yeah, you'll see me like reposting memes about, animals and stuff as well. But those are the main ways to find me. Yeah. Oracle of LA. Sorry, Oracle of LA is my handle on Instagram. And then if you want to book an appointment with me, like if you feel like you really want to connect and do some ritual together or get some divination, or you have some things that you'd like to clarify, I'd love to hold that with you. And you can book an appointment at oracleoflosangeles.com.
Beautiful. Well, we'll have those links in the show notes as well.
Thank you. Thank you for creating this space. It's been such an honor and a pleasure, and indeed a blessing to be here.
Thank you.
In addition to the energies of blessings, let's call in those energies of gratitude, and inhaling gratitude. sharing gratitude with our systems, our community and collective, for our shared time. Gratitude, gratitude, gratitude. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Ashe, 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 aho, aho, aho.
Resources that we share today can be found in our show notes and at thequeerspirit.com.
You're invited to follow our show on Apple Podcasts or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time, much love and blessings. Aho.